Hello class and welcome to the chapter on memory, including the processes of encoding, storage, and retrieval. In this chapter, we're going to be looking at the processes necessary to encode information into the brain, store the information until it's ready to be used, and retrieve the information when we need it. Then I will give you a short memory test where you can see how good your memory is. Don't worry, it's not graded and I won't be collecting the results. It's more for demonstration purposes. We will also look at the 3 stages of memory, which include sensory memory, short-term memory, and long-term memory, in which encoding, storage, and retrieval take place. Then we will take a look at the types of long-term memories, including procedural, episodic, and semantic memories, which are all remembered very differently by the brain. After we cover long-term memories, we will examine the difference between explicit and implicit memories. Then, one of my favorite parts of this chapter is going over some tips and tricks to increase memory, including the serial position effect and some mnemonics. We will also define some disorders in memory and theories of forgetting. And finally, we'll discuss the question, can we really trust eyewitness testimony? Memory involves getting information such as perceptions, feelings, or thoughts into the brain, otherwise known as encoding, retaining that information, otherwise known as storage, and being able to pull it out and remember it later, otherwise known as retrieval. These are the 3 memory processes of the brain. These are different from the 3 stages of the brain that we'll cover after the short memory test. One model views human memory as somewhat similar to a computer's information processing system. However, human memories are more complex and fragile than a computer's memory. The brain processes memories at different stages simultaneously, while a computer processes information sequentially. Now let's test your memory. Remember that I won't be collecting the results or grading you. This is for demonstration purposes only. For this memory test, you will need a blank piece of paper and a pen or a pencil, as well as a quiet room to concentrate. If you don't have them, please pause this recording now to go get ready. Okay, ready? Great. Please do not write anything until the end. For this test, you will only need your brain. On the next screen, you will see some instructions. Please put everything down and make sure that you are ready to concentrate. Ready? You will soon see a list of words flashed in the middle of the screen, one at a time, for 2 seconds each. Try to remember as many as you can in any order. Ready? 3, 2, 1. Okay, now please count backwards from 10. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Now pick up your pen or pencil and write down as many words as you can in any order. No rewinding. Okay, go ahead and count how many you have. There were 12 words. Don't worry if you did not get all 12. Most people don't. The average number ranges between 5 and 9 items. We will talk more about this through the lesson, so keep this list handy. Want to see the items? Here they are in order. Compare your list with the one that you wrote. Do you notice any patterns? Again, keep it handy. We'll come back to this later. If you notice 3 categories, you are correct. There were animals, foods, and weather. If you noticed this during the test, you probably remembered more than the average number of items. Good work. If you didn't, don't worry. I will give you some tips later that might help you the next time you have a list of things to memorize. For now, let's just look at the stages of memory and how this information gets from outside of you to your brain. The 3 stages of memory in which encoding, storage, and retrieval take place are sensory memory, short-term memory, and long-term memory. Sensory memory, as its name suggests, involves our senses: our eyes, ears, nose, mouth, and skin. It briefly holds an exact image of the information and lasts less than a second for our visual or iconic memory, and 4 to 5 seconds for our auditory or echoic memory. We are usually unaware of our sensory memory. However, some people have an increased capability to process these images, sometimes popularly referred to as a photographic memory, where some individuals can actually store an exact image of, say, a textbook during an exam, and be able to recall the information on the page by visualizing the textbook in their brain. Which brings us to the next stage of short-term memory. Short-term memory, abbreviated STM, is limited in its capacity. It is often misused by the general population. Many people believe that if they can't remember something that happened a short time ago, then it must have been a bad short-term memory. However, this is not necessarily true, unless we are talking about the last few minutes or so. In actuality, without rehearsal, STM only lasts about 30 seconds, and the average amount of information we can remember at one time is about 7 plus or minus 2 chunks, or units. This is what is meant by the 7 plus or minus 2 rule. We can only on average remember 5 to 9 units at a time. As we saw in the memory test, if you did not take note that there were categories of words in the list, your number of words remembered was likely to fall somewhere between 5 to 9 words. However, we can overcome this limited capacity of short-term memory by chunking the information. And yes, that is the technical term in psychology, chunking. If you took notice of at least one of the categories of words, chances are that you remembered more than the 5 to 9 average. This is useful information to know because now you can use this to your advantage when studying for tests. Chunk your information into categories to remember more. The last stage of information processing is long-term memory, abbreviated LTM. In order to get information stored in our brain, we must process it through all 3 stages. Our long-term memory is all of the information we know, and it's more or less permanent. We will discuss theories of forgetting in which the less comes in, but most of the information that is thoroughly processed is permanent. Much of what we remember can be increased or decreased by the amount of recall and rehearsal of the information. But as we will see at the end of this chapter, when we discuss eyewitness testimony, these memories can be altered, especially in terms of how we perceive reality and our experiences that collide with these memories, such as another person's recall of the same memory. So here we have a diagram of how these 3 stages of memory work. Have you ever tried to remember someone's name after first meeting them? What do you do when you try to remember their name? If you are like most people, you probably look at their face and repeat their name at least once in your head while picturing their face. If you successfully remember the person's name later that day, you have processed the memory fully through all three stages into your long-term memory. If not, then somewhere along the process, you either did not rehearse the name enough or forgetting occurred at one of the stages. So let's walk through this example. The woman in red sees and hears through her senses the name Linda. She attends to the information and rehearses the name and image of Linda in her short-term memory. She then stores the information in her long-term memory, much like a file going into a filing cabinet, until it's needed later. Later, when the woman in red approaches Linda, she retrieves the information and sends it back into the short-term memory, where it can be rehearsed again. The more times that the woman in red retrieves and rehearses Linda's name and image, the more likely the file will become permanent in memory. This process of recalling and rehearsing information is the reason why short-term memory is sometimes referred to as working memory, because it literally works the information. As you can see, forgetting can occur at each stage. There are many theories of why we forget, and it's still unclear which one is more robust. But let's discuss what they are, as they all have some validity. The theories of forgetting. Encoding failure theory. Encoding failure theory states that forgetting is due to the failure to encode the information into long-term memory. For example, using the model from the previous slide, if the woman in red did not process the information well enough into short-term memory, the name Linda would not reach long-term memory and therefore be forgotten. The next theory of forgetting is the storage decay theory. The storage decay theory states that forgetting is due to the decay of the biological representation of the information in long-term memory. Storage decay theory is also known simply as decay theory. Researchers argue that decay theory can happen at any stage and has to do with the decay of the biological representation of the memory. In other words, the neurons fail to make a permanent connection. Just like an apple will decay in the sun, information decays over time, especially if those neurons are not firing. The third theory of forgetting is interference theory. Interference theory states that forgetting is due to the interference of other information in long-term memory, making the forgotten information inaccessible. This often happens when you have information similar in category. For example, if I gave you a list of mountains to remember and then gave you a list of rivers, then asked you to recall the list of mountains, you may have difficulty because the nature of the information was so similar. It interferes with your memory even though the information was still processed. The fourth theory of forgetting is cue-dependent theory, also known as retrieval failure. Cue-dependent theory states that forgetting is due to the unavailability of the retrieval cues necessary to locate the information in long-term memory. This often occurs when there is a lack of information or cues necessary to access a memory. Have you ever tried to think of a movie title but couldn't think of it at the moment, but you knew the information was in your brain? That's forgetting due to cue-dependent theory. It's like the information is on the tip of your tongue. You know the information is there, but you just can't recall it. In psychology, they actually call this the tip of the tongue phenomenon. Recent evidence has stretched this theory further to show that even your mood can cue a corresponding memory, sometimes called mood-dependent theory or internal cue theory. Another theory not included on this chart is displacement theory, which you may have noticed on the previous slide. Displacement is forgetting that happens when there is a lack of availability. When the short-term memory is full, new information displaces or pushes out old information and takes its place. The old information which is displaced is forgotten in short-term memory. We will see an example of this when we cover the serial position effect soon. Do you know how to ride a bike or swim, tie your shoes? Chances are, if you have learned how to do these procedures, you will never forget them. These are procedural memories, and they involve memories that are processed with motor movement and skills. You are very unlikely to forget these types of memories because it is theorized that they involve some of the most primitive parts of our brain that allow us to survive and keep our bodies moving. Procedural memories are a type of long-term memory. There are other types of long-term memories as well, including episodic and semantic. Procedural memories have to do with procedures. Can you guess what episodic memories have to do with? That's right, if you notice the word episode in episodic, it's episodes in your life. Just like an episode on TV, we experience episodes in our life that are stored into memories. The more emotional value a memory has, the more likely it is to be remembered. This includes good and bad memories. Examples of episodic memories are a birthday party, your first kiss, or even a traumatic experience. The last type of long-term memory is semantic memories. Semantic memories are best referred to as your book knowledge or factual knowledge. The information that you learn has no reference to a particular time and space in your life, unlike episodic memories, which do have terms in time and space. For example, you may remember that you learned what 22 minus 11 equals, but you probably don't remember where you learned that information exactly. This goes for any kind of information that you learn in any school subject area like history, science, or literature. Even the information you are learning now is considered to be semantic long-term memories. The three types of long-term memories can be divided into categories. They include explicit and implicit memories. Explicit memories, also known as declarative memories, are memories that require conscious recall. They include episodic and semantic memories. These memories are not automatic, and it does require that you purposefully recall the information from your long-term memory. On the other hand, implicit memories, also known as non-declarative memories, are memories that do not require conscious recall. They include procedural memories, classical conditioning memories, and priming memories. Implicit memories do not require much effort to recall and are essentially automatic. If you remember from the chapter on learning, we learned that classical conditioning is when we learn through association, like the example with Pavlov's dog. He learned that the bell meant food, and that the bell meant food was coming, and so caused the dog to salivate. Classical conditioning becomes an automatic process then, and in humans, it is the reason why some people form habits, phobias, and addictions. However, just because something is automatic does not mean that we cannot change it. It's important to note that even though implicit memories are hard to rewire in the brain, we can choose and make an effort to change them if we are strong enough and motivated enough to do so. The last implicit memory is priming. Have you ever mowed the lawn with a push mower? Did it have a priming button that needed to be pushed in order for it to start? Just like the priming button on a mower gets a motor ready to mow, the priming of the brain gets the brain ready to think. For example, if I said the word beach to you, What's the first thing that would come to mind? Because our brain is associative, we are likely to think of things associated in our brain with our experience and knowledge of beaches. Perhaps you might think of sand or the ocean, a swimsuit or a colorful towel. Or maybe you hate the beach because you had a bad experience of being stung by a jellyfish, and so your first thought is of pain. Priming is an automatic memory process that occurs to get us ready for something else. This happens in our daily lives when we hear particular sounds, encounter different people, or any other sensation that tells us automatically how to behave. In fact, priming is so effective in predicting behavior that even governments and businesses use it to manipulate the masses. Media images are often used to stimulate related thoughts in people's minds in social media, even the news and Hollywood movies. Priming is so powerful that you often have to ask yourself how influenced you were in the presidential election by the media. What products have you bought because of advertisements? Some media is so powerful that it can predict people's social behavior. It's actually a really interesting topic, which we will learn more about in our chapter on social psychology. For now, let's stick to memory. Every student, regardless of major, can use some tips and tricks to increase their memory. Here are some scientifically backed ways to help you remember things, whether it be for a test in school or even just what you need to do for the day. The first tip and trick is the serial position effect. It states that when remembering a list of items, you are more likely to remember the things at the beginning and at the end of a list more than the middle items. Remember the memory test that I gave you at the beginning of the lecture? Take a look at your recalled words. Were you more likely to remember the first and last words and more likely to forget the middle? If you did, this shows the serial position effect. The reasons for why this happens is because of the primacy and recency effects. The primacy effect creates easier recall because the information is being rehearsed and then stored in your long-term memory. The recency effect creates easier recall because the information is still being rehearsed in short-term memory. So what's the tip and the trick? Spend more time on the middle. Because you are more likely to remember the items at the beginning and the end of a list, the middle definitely needs more processing time. Mnemonics. Mnemonics is the study and development of systems for improving and assisting the memory. Here are some of the tips and tricks to increase your memory through the use of the most common mnemonics. Some of these mnemonics take some time to learn, but once you have learned them, they'll save you hours of trying to memorize material through rehearsal alone. The first are word mnemonics, like the name Roy G. Biv. This is an example of how to remember the colors of the rainbow in order from left to right by using the letters in the name to cue the names of the colors. Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. Roy G. Biv. You can do this with any list of words. Just create and scramble the words up until you create an actual name like Roy G. Biv. One of the other examples of a word mnemonic is every good boy deserves fudge. This one creates an easy to remember sentence that will cue you to remember the order of a set of letters. For example, this sentence is a trick in music to remember the notes on the lines of a staff. The word face, F-A-C-E, creates the notes and the spaces of the staff. You can also use model mnemonics. You can use model mnemonics to remember things like the number of days in each of the months of the year. By placing your two fists together and starting with your pinky knuckle for January, each bump will be 31 days and the spaces between are 30, with the exception of February, which has 28 days. Music mnemonics are also helpful when teaching children the alphabet. It's easier to teach them with a song than with verbal telling alone. The song triggers stronger recall and can even be remembered years after it's been taught. Rhyme mnemonics are also a great way for this next example for grammar. The rhyme I before E except after C, or when sounding like A in neighbor and way, is a great way to remember some of the grammar techniques. The spacing effect is a mnemonic also known as the distributed study method, which is simply a way of learning information in chunks that are more easily absorbed. Spacing out our study time reduces some of the complications that happen with forgetting and allows a more solid memory store of the information. Mental mapping is a great way of remembering information as well. Did any of you during the memory test create a visual story in your head of a bear eating a cheese pizza with a leopard on a cloudy day? If you did, that was the use of a mental map. It's a way of visualizing information into a story or a map that you can remember easily. Some people place items in a visual representation of their house to remember a long list of items, placing an item on a table or on a chair or on the kitchen counter and moving from room to room. Finally, the peg word system is a mnemonic that is used by some of the most talented mnemonists. This system seems a little bit convoluted at first, but it's remarkably easy to remember in just a couple minutes of study and can be used over and over again to remember long lists of information, like a shopping list, vocabulary list, or even a packing list. First, remember the rhymes to start. One is a bun. The key here is to visualize the items to be remembered together. For example, if one is a bun and the first thing that I need to remember is eggs, I visualize an egg in a bun. This might be silly, but trust me, if you make the image distinctive, it's more memorable than you might think. We will test it. Okay, so with me. One is a bun with an egg in it. Picture it in your head? Good. Now, two is a shoe with a loaf of bread smoothed in it, or even as a shoe, a loaf of bread as a shoe. Three is a tree with a biscuit on the branch. A biscuit could be even a cookie. They call cookies biscuits in England. Four is a door with a smashed tomato on it. Five is a hive made out of mashed potatoes. Six are sticks, cheese sticks, or snack sticks. Seven is heaven with a grape jam cloud. Eight is a gate made of spaghetti or linguine. 9 is a line of juice spilled on the counter. 10 is a hen with Kellogg's Corn Flakes hen on the box. All right, you got it. Now let's see how good this peg word system is with just that one run-through of the list. Okay, so let's test this peg word system. All right, the first one, do you remember the rhymes? Let's go through the rhymes first. The first one is a bun, that's right. 2 is a shoe. 3 is a tree. 4 is a door. 5 is a hive. 6 is sticks. 7 is heaven. 8 is a gate. 9 is a line. And 10 is a hen. Great. Okay, so do you remember the first item on the list? What's the image that pops in your head? 1 is a bun. What's inside the bun? Yep, that's right, an egg. And bear with me with these pictures, it's the best I could do. Number 2 is a shoe. What are you picturing? Yep, bread for shoes. 3 is a tree. What's in the tree? Yeah, those cookies, or biscuits as they call them in England. All right, 4 is a door. What's on the door? Smashed tomatoes. Yeah, that's the best I could do on that one. 5 is a hive. It was really hard to find mashed potatoes in the shape of a beehive, but I seem to get it. 6 is sticks. What was it? Cheese, that's right. 7 is heaven. Oh, this one's a tough one. Maybe it was the grape jam clouds. 8 is a gate. Yep, that's right. We have a macaroni or pasta or spaghetti gate. Oh, Golden Gate, if that is. 9 is a line. What is it? Juice on the counter. And then the final one, 10 is a hen. You're probably picturing that Kellogg's box. There it is. So what do you think? Did the peg system work for you? So I hope you find all those tips and tricks useful. Now let's talk a little bit about the disorders in memory, specifically amnesia. There are 2 types of amnesia, retrograde and anterograde. Both are caused by trauma to the brain, either physically or psychologically. In retrograde amnesia, individuals are unable to remember events that occurred prior to the trauma. You might be able to remember this from the word retro, meaning to go back or old. These people can no longer remember their past, however, they are able to create new memories. In anterograde amnesia, individuals are unable to remember events that occur after trauma. These people can remember their past clearly, but have difficulty creating new memories. The length of time that one can create new memories can vary. After this time, the memory is forgotten, and then they return to the status from which they started. A great example of a movie showing anterograde amnesia is a comedy called 50 First Dates with Adam Sandler and Drew Barrymore. It's one of my favorites, so if you ever get the chance, rent it. It's really funny. Infantile amnesia is a phenomenon that occurs to most people. In most cases, people cannot recall episodes that happened to them prior to the age of 2. Recall is usually cloudy until age 5. The reasons for this are only speculative and range from childhood memories being too traumatic, as in repression, or there not being any interest in remembering the past as a child, to a lack of an associative network or the use of language. Many psychologists lean toward the explanation that it probably is more of a physical cause, in which the hippocampus is underdeveloped and unable to process the memories into long-term memory. Finally, one of the major questions that I am curious about and spent much of my graduate school time studying was something called the misinformation effect. The research was started by a famous study done by Loftus and Palmer. They and all of the researchers that followed discovered that approximately 1/3 of participants were vulnerable to false memories. That is, they recalled memories of events that never occurred. This resulted in the misinformation effect, in which people are given an event to witness, and then a short while later, given some misinformation about that event. The people are then asked to recall the event as they remember it initially. What resulted is this concerning percentage of people who reported false information as true information. Their studies brought to light to courtrooms that eyewitness testimony, which was previously thought to hold high value and is still to some, is flawed 1 out of 3 times. When one's innocence is on the line, these odds are horrifying. So can we trust eyewitnesses? Well, the answer is yes, most of the time. But it's not a 100% way of proving a person's guilt or innocence. We should always weigh all of the evidence just in case, and never just rely on eyewitness testimony. So that concludes our chapter on memory. Now your moment of what the, where we get to use one of the tips and tricks that I taught you earlier.
Here in London, we've explored the oldest part of your brain, the brainstem. And our next stop is the hippocampus, where your brain processes memory. To get started, let's meet some royalty. Here are 8 paintings of British kings and queens. We've got Kings George the First, Second, and Third, Queens Victoria and Anne, King William the Fourth, King Edward the Seventh, and Queen Elizabeth the Second. Now, can you recall all our kings and queens? Or did we give you too many names and not enough time? Well, take a look at this sentence instead. Believe it or not, guarding giraffes guarantees victory and will eliminate extinction might just give your memory a big boost. Look closely at the first letter of each word. This sentence is actually what's called a mnemonic device, a memory shortcut. And using the words of this sentence, can you remember our kings and queens now? With a little help, were you able to place George, Victoria, Anne, William, Edward, and Elizabeth? Pretty impressive trick, right?